How Putin is going to take over the European economy. Amidst the Ukraine crisis, the Russian leader has divided to irritate all Europe rather than divide and conquer diplomatically. Vladimir V. Putin has spent the better part of his 22 years in office attempting to keep Russia's position in Europe in check. He became friends with certain capitals while intimidating others, and he wanted economic unification while decreeing European principles as he went about it. The Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014 sent relations into freefall, but Moscow reached out to other European countries, if not to win them over, at least to keep diplomacy open. Moscow hounded several European countries with mass-scale disinformation and close-miss military flybys. Mr. Putin, on the other hand, is embracing something he had previously avoided: enmity against Europe. As a result, in today's video, we'll show how Putin is going to take over the European economy. Hello and welcome to Economic Stories. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and enable notifications to receive more videos like this. As European military forces move eastward and economic sanctions are threatened in response to each escalation of Moscow's threats, Mr. Putin increases his threats even further. In addition, he has mostly avoided European capitals in favor of Washington, D.C. diplomacy, rather than concentrating on it. Russia's perception of European governments as American puppets to be dismissed, as well as its assertion that it is a major power standing in the middle of Europe rather than an extremely powerful neighbor, are both reinforced by the action. The Russian government's ambitions to radically alter the European security order are also on display in this country. However, there is a danger of drawing Europe together, as well as of amplifying more hawkish voices and capitals in the process. Even as it strives to expel America from Europe, there is a danger that it may be drawn back in again. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has not given up on Europe just yet, according to reports. He held a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron. Even if the issue is not contained in time, President Obama may make an effort to rebuild European relations once the dust has settled. Even though Moscow's eastern flank is smaller and weaker than it was during the Cold War, many believe that his policy will leave Europe armed and divided in the long run. The Kremlin has often signaled a desire to return to a time when Europe's security order was determined by two big powers, even though Ukraine may have played a role in putting it in its position in the first place. Communication between Moscow and Washington on a direct basis, such as that which occurred in the late 1960s, might provide the groundwork for an eventual reapproachment. Neither hubris nor the desire to be a powerful, great power is responsible for this situation. Moscow's growing perception that this agreement has already been put in place is also reflected by this development. It was expected that negotiations between Moscow, Kyiv, Paris, and Berlin would resolve the crisis as a result of Moscow's annexation of Crimea and invasion of eastern Ukraine, for which Western nations retaliated with economic sanctions. No matter how much pressure was brought to bear by the United States, the European Union was urged to find a solution to maintain a stable balance on the continent. On paper, the so-called Minsk agreements achieved Russian aims, but the Kremlin claimed Ukraine had broken its word by refusing to implement them. According to Moscow, European countries are either reluctant or unable to press Ukraine to complete its reforms by the end of 2019 or 2020 in the early stages. According to Russian analysts, this confirmed an old conviction that hard military strength, not only Germany's or France's economic might, determine the course of history. According to the Russians' perspective, the United States is our only option because they are the only ones who matter. Russia and the United States have both seen their military strength drop significantly in recent years, making the European Union a less powerful interlocutor for Moscow on Ukraine. By leaving the United Kingdom, this situation became even worse. While Europe is divided on how to deal with Russia, the continent is unable to come up with a single strategy to cope with the Russian threat. Europe has found itself constantly pulled between the American-led status quo and other choices as a result of Angela Merkel's retirement and Emmanuel Macron's failed attempts to assume unofficial European leadership. Outside of Paris and Brussels, the United States leadership in this crisis is sorely needed. With this evidence, Russia's claim that Europe is a puppet in the United States and hence does not require independent engagement has been partially verified. Even though Mr. Putin has not revealed what his exact plans for Ukraine are, he has made it plain that his goal is to unify all of Europe under his leadership. It has always been Russia's goal in prior Ukrainian conflicts to prevent Ukraine from becoming a more aligned state with the Western interests. The European Union attempted to avoid confrontation and even cooperation to protect its interests in Ukraine. Because its Ukraine-focused efforts has failed to achieve its objectives, such as halting or even reversing NATO's eastward expansion, Moscow may now be calling for a rethink of Europe's security architecture as a result of this failure. Whatever the circumstances surround such a move, it would fundamentally alter the laws that have governed the continent since the end of the Cold War. A formal decision would be formed between the Western world and the Eastern world, with Moscow being granted control in the latter. Rather than attempting to manage the current European system, Moscow seeks to overthrow the post-Cold War order. To put it another way, it has resulted in efforts to coerce not only Ukraine but also the rest of Europe in the hopes of making a standoff with Europe not only acceptable but even as an instrument for progress in the future. The most powerful military state on the continent does not consider itself to be a component of the European Union's security system. Russia's interfering with the infrastructure or potentially even seeking to remove it has heightened European security concerns to previously unthinkable levels. Because it demonstrates that Putin is willing to risk even the collective wrath of Europe to accomplish his ambitions in Ukraine, Putin's willingness to accept widespread tensions with Europe may serve to strengthen his position in Ukraine. However, the formation of a hostile relationship between Europe and Russia places them on a path that is fraught with uncertainty and risk for all parties, regardless of what happens in Ukraine. Another one of the most dangerous features of international relations is the sanctions, diplomatic expulsions, and other forms of retaliation that can easily spiral out of hand, resulting in the harming of both parties. Because of domestic political upheaval in both Russia and Europe, business ties between the two countries are deteriorating. The most powerful military state on the continent does not consider itself to be a component of the European Union's security system. Instead, European security is more tenuous than it appears as a result of Moscow's rattling the cage or even seeking to bring down the infrastructure that protects Europe. There is a risk that sanctions, diplomatic expulsions, and various sorts of retribution will spiral out of hand, causing harm to both parties. Because of domestic political upheaval in both Russia and Europe, business ties between the two countries are deteriorating. For Moscow and Europe, getting along hasn't always been straightforward. The majority of their efforts have been concentrated on the Russian to European energy trade, which has ramifications for practically the whole continental economy. Our concern is that America could be pushed further into a region of the world that it had planned to minimize in favor of Asia, increasing its vulnerability. Immediate consequences of Europe's disintegration include precisely what Moscow has long desired: increasing American influence in Eastern Europe and stronger European cooperation against Russia, albeit hesitantly forged. According to the surface of things, the Kremlin's current approach towards Europe appears to be somewhat dumb. According to some observers, it's plausible that Putin isn't bluffing or isn't blind to the repercussions of his actions, but rather that he's actively dividing Europe against himself to promote his interests in Ukraine, which is a more concerning possibility. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and switch on alerts so that you can be notified whenever a new video is up. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.